Hey, here are 5 stupid things I've noticed about the Apostle Paul. His suspect conversion story. I'll give Paul this much, it's a hell of a story. The Christian persecuting Pharisee sees a bright light that blinds him, hears the voice of Jesus, goes into town where his blindness is healed by a follower of Jesus who baptizes Paul as a Christian. The problem is that the only source ever cited for Paul's miraculous conversion experience is Paul himself. His traveling companions on the road to Damascus supposedly saw the same bright light and heard the same voice. Or maybe they didn't. There are multiple conflicting accounts about that. But their testimony isn't recorded anywhere either way. And even if we assume that Paul isn't just making this all up, there are multiple potential explanations that are far more plausible than Paul really encountering a vision of the risen Christ. For instance, an epileptic seizure, a psychotic episode, or he made the whole thing up. He's a self-appointed apostle. One thing that everybody agrees on, including Paul, is that Paul never actually met Jesus in the flesh. His conversion experience, if it happened, took place after the death of Jesus. There's also evidence in the book of Acts and the Pauline epistles that Paul didn't really get along with the early leaders of the Christian church. None of the apostles appointed by Jesus ever refers to Paul as an apostle. And there are multiple references, some of which are attributed to Paul himself, to Paul disobeying orders from church elders and complaining about being judged and accused of being a liar. Maybe the leaders of the early Christian church caught the same whiff of bullshit off of Paul's conversion story that I do. And maybe they also had a problem with the fact that he contradicts the teachings of Jesus. Paul arguably had an even bigger impact on Christianity than the guy it's named after, which is kind of odd if you think about it. For someone who supposedly worshiped Jesus as a god, Paul sure wasn't bashful about supplanting the teachings of Jesus with his own shit. For example, Jesus says to pray privately in your own room. Paul, on the other hand, says to pray openly everywhere. Jesus says to be humble. Paul is boastful and self-promoting. And Paul's oft-quoted declaration that none are righteous is contradicted by multiple other passages elsewhere in the Bible. I could go on. Point is, Paul is an egomaniacal dick. And he's a dick for other reasons, too. For example, he's sexist as hell. The Bible is an extremely misogynistic book in general, but the most blatantly shitty attitudes toward women in the New Testament come from Paul. He's the one who wrote that women should not be allowed to teach or have authority over men, should dress modestly, submit to their husbands, and remain silent. He also recommends against marriage, and in 1 Timothy chapter 5 goes off on this bizarre rant about how you should only help widows who are over 60 years old, have no children, and are quote-unquote desolate. Something tells me if Paul were alive today, he'd be ranting on Twitter against the evil religion of feminism and exhorting his fellow males to take the red pill without a trace of irony. He might not have written half the books attributed to him. If I wanted to be fair to Paul, and I'm an atheist, so ultimately I don't give a shit, but if I wanted to, I might point out that only 7 of the 14 Pauline epistles are now considered to be the genuine work of Paul by a consensus of New Testament scholars. And the worst of the anti-woman stuff is found in 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, which are collectively known as the pastoral epistles, and which are the most disputed of the Pauline epistles. Then again, even if we ignore all of the disputed books, Paul still comes across as a presumptuous, sanctimonious, homophobic, woman-hating, self-aggrandizing, aspiring cult leader. His influence on Christianity was bad enough during his own lifetime. What's worse is how many Christians have followed him in the last 2,000 years and lived up to his example so faithfully. The hardest part is only picking 5. Catch you next time.